He slid the legal document across the polished mahogany table, not quite meeting my gaze. "Here, Mother," he said, his voice clipped. "These are the papers for the sale. 20,000. That should be more than enough for a decent apartment. It's all you'll ever need from the house." I looked at his hands. Young, unblemished, a subtle gleam from a recent manicure. My own hands, resting on the velvet armrest of the antique chair I'd brought from home, were marked by years of drafting blueprints, shaping clay, tending the rose garden. They were strong, still, a strength he had long ceased to acknowledge. The solicitor, Mr. Davies, sat stiffly behind his imposing desk, pretending to organize files. The room, Marcus's private office, in his new downtown firm, smelled of expensive leather and ambition. My son sat beside me, radiating an air of dutiful charity. His suit was impeccable, his watch worth more than my first car. I took the folded document without a word, slipping it into my worn leather tote bag, the same bag he'd once called QUAINT and suggested I replace. Then I met his eyes. He offered a tight, satisfied smile. "Now you won't have to worry about the upkeep anymore. You're all set, free and clear." I smiled back, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "Thank you, Marcus. That's very thoughtful." He didn't hear the steel beneath my words, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He stood, adjusting his cufflink. "All right then, I've got a client meeting. Mr. Davies will walk you through the final details. I've already streamlined the property transfer, consolidated the assets. You'll have your little nest egg, and the rest of the estate will be managed efficiently now." I nodded, feigning mild appreciation. He leaned in, a perfunctory kiss brushing my temple, barely touching my skin. "Take care, Mother." Then he strode out of the office, his steps quick and confident, the gait of a man convinced of his victory. Mr. Davies, the solicitor, cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. "Mrs. Vance, shall we proceed with the signing?" I took my time, unhurriedly opening my tote, retrieving my reading glasses, and settling them onto my nose. "No, Mr. Davies," I said, folding my hands calmly in my lap. "I won't be signing anything today." He blinked, his composure visibly cracking. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no," I repeated, a little more distinctly this time. "None of these documents are valid. The powers of attorney were revoked last month. Marcus no longer has any authority over my properties or finances." Mr. Davies stared at me as if I had suddenly begun reciting poetry in an ancient tongue. I wasn't aware." "You wouldn't be," I said gently. "Marcus fancies himself quite shrewd. But I've lived long enough to recognize the pattern when someone starts managing things without asking." I produced another envelope from my tote, this one bearing the elegant letterhead of Vance and Associates, my own firm. "This," I stated, placing it on the desk, "is the only document that matters today." Mr. Davies took the envelope with a hesitant hand. He opened it, read silently, his eyes widening with each line, then looked at me, utterly stunned. "Everything is already transferred to a new family trust." "That's right," I confirmed. "Marcus was never meant to be my keeper. He just never realized I stopped being his safety net a long, long time ago." I rose slowly, the familiar ache in my knees, a dull throb, but entirely manageable. "I'll be taking the document my son gave me. I'm quite certain he'll be needing it soon." Mr. Davies remained silent, staring at the papers, his mouth slightly agape. I left him there, the scent of new carpet and old ambition fading behind me. Outside, the crisp autumn wind hit my face, a bracing slap of truth. I stood on the steps of the grand old building, the city bustling around me, and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Not anger, not vindication, relief. I hadn't come here today to make a scene. I had come to make a statement. And now that it was made, the heavy weight I hadn't even realized I carried simply lifted. I walked back to my car, a sensible sedan that had seen many years and many miles, but so had I. I sat behind the wheel, took a deep, cleansing breath, and allowed myself a single, mirthless chuckle. All I had ever poured into him, and he thought I'd settle for $20,000. He truly didn't know me at all. The house smelled of cedar and old books, a scent that had soaked into the Victorian's timbers over decades. This was the house Arthur and I had bought in '78, a grand old dame with 3 stories, a wraparound porch, and a garden that had once been Arthur's pride. We'd raised Marcus here. Every corner held some echo of that. A faint crayon mark on the parlor wall from his toddler years. A chipped banister where he'd slid down too many times. I hung my cashmere coat on the antique hall tree by the door. One of the hooks was slightly loose. Arthur had meant to tighten it the week he died. In the living room, sunlight streamed through the stained glass window, casting jewel-toned patterns on the Persian rug. The mantelpiece was cluttered with photographs, some dusty, some leaning from where I'd never quite straightened the frames. Arthur on a hiking trip with Marcus, both beaming, holding up a small, freshly caught trout. Arthur and I at our 30th anniversary, grinning like teenagers. Marcus at his university graduation, barely looking at the camera, his eyes already fixed on some distant, more lucrative horizon. I think that was the last time he hugged me without a clear agenda. I eased into my favorite armchair by the bay window, the one that had molded itself to my shape over time. The spring sighed softly under me. Funny, isn't it? How slowly things change. Not all at once, not with slamming doors or shouting matches, just little things. Fewer calls, shorter visits, more pronouncements than questions. It had started subtly. Marcus needed help with his first office rent after law school. I provided it. Then it was the seed money for his first solo practice. Then the emergency renovation for his wife, Chloe's, boutique. Then the private school fees for the twins. Then the second luxury car. Then the landscaping for their summer home. Each time he'd said, "Just this once, Mother." And each time I'd believed him. The old leather-bound ledger in the drawer of my architect's drafting table held the history. I used to record everything in elegant script. Then my hands grew stiff, and I switched to block letters. One entry after another, neat lines in blue ink, Marcus Vance, Marcus Vance, Marcus Vance. I once joked to Arthur that Marcus ought to put me on his payroll. Arthur just shook his head and said, "He's our boy, Alara. That's what we do." But that was before Arthur died. After that, it was just me and Marcus's needs. I went to the drafting table now, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the thick, well-worn folder. Marcus, Property and Investments, it said, in my own handwriting, from back when I still made meticulous labels. I flipped it open. Pages of photocopies, detailed notes, receipts, bank statements. $25,000 for the ill-fated tech startup he'd invested in that folded in less than 2 years. $38,000 for the second mortgage on his first condo, which I'd co-signed and later paid off. $12,500 for his daughter's elite equestrian lessons. I knew these numbers by heart. I knew them because I kept telling myself, this is the last time, until the last time became today. $20,000 from my own home, presented like a charitable donation. I smiled now, without a trace of humor. That money, if I ever took it, was going straight back into the trust. I rose slowly, my joints crackling like dry autumn leaves. My body had aged, yes, but not my mind, not my sense of what was fair, of what I deserved. Marcus thought I was slipping. He thought I was fading, but all he saw was what he wanted to see, an old woman, too soft to notice the door quietly closing behind her. He never stopped to ask what I needed, only what I could provide. And now I was done providing. The phone rang, not a shrill, modern ring, but that soft, classic tone I'd never changed. I picked it up. Grandma? My heart softened immediately. I would have known that voice anywhere, in any crowd. Hi, Leo. Everything all right? Yeah. Just wanted to check in. I know Dad said you had some bank stuff today. Wanted to see how you're doing. Leo, my grandson, Marcus's youngest, 26, finishing his doctorate in urban history, living in a modest apartment, insisting on paying his own way. The only one who still called me just to talk, without a hidden agenda. I'm fine, sweetheart, just tying up some loose ends. But your call, that's the best thing I've heard all day. He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound. Want me to stop by tomorrow? I can bring that lemon meringue pie you like, from the bakery downtown. I'd love that, I said, my voice cracking just a little. You know something, Leo. You're a good boy, and you've never asked me for a thing. He hesitated, as if unsure how to respond to such an unexpected compliment. Well, you've done plenty for us, Grandma. I just wish, Dad. Let's not talk about him now. I interrupted gently. I'll see you tomorrow then. Okay? Okay. Love you, Grandma. Love you too, dear. After I hung up, I stood there for a long time, staring at the quiet phone. Not everything I gave was wasted. I first met Evelyn Reed in a small, cluttered office on Elm Street almost 20 years ago, when Arthur and I still did our own taxes and thought hiring a lawyer was something only the truly wealthy did. She wore a sensible navy suit and glasses that magnified her keen, intelligent eyes in a way that made her seem permanently curious, but she was anything but naive. She was the first person I called after I got home from Marcus's office. Now, sitting across from her in that same office, albeit with newer artwork on the walls and fancier computers, I felt a deep, abiding calm I'd been missing for years. I handed her the property transfer document Marcus had given me. She didn't open it. He thinks he won, I said, my voice steady, betraying no emotion. Evelyn nodded slowly. And he doesn't know you've already revoked his access to the estate properties? He has no idea, I confirmed. I went through Mr. Henderson at Sterling Trust. All authorizations were pulled last month. Marcus's name is off everything. I made sure of that before I even told him I was going to the bank today. Evelyn offered a soft, knowing smile, the kind of smile people give you when they think you finally caught up to something they knew all along. I should have done it years ago, I added, a faint regret in my tone. But you didn't feel ready, she supplied. No, I corrected. I felt guilty. She didn't comment. That was her strength, a silence that created space for truth. He's my son, I said after a moment, the words tasting slightly bitter. I wanted to believe that if I just helped enough, just gave him the chance, the start, the support, He'd eventually see me as more than a resource to be tapped. I stared at the pale green folder she was assembling in front of her. My name, Ilara Vance, typed neatly on the tab. She was gathering the documents I'd need for the new trust, not Marcus's name on the beneficiary line. Not anymore. Do you still want to proceed with transferring full ownership of your estate, including the properties, into the new trust? She asked, her voice professional but gentle. I nodded. And the primary beneficiary? My grandson, Leo, I said, without hesitation. He's the only one who visits because he wants to, not because he's angling for something. The only one who's ever said thank you without a hidden agenda. Evelyn scribbled something on a yellow legal pad, and Marcus, not a cent. She looked up, pausing just long enough to gauge if I was wavering. I'm not angry, I clarified. I'm just done. I have nothing left to explain to him. He decided who I was years ago, and now he can live with it. We went over the formalities. Evelyn was efficient, explaining each clause in plain language, the structure of the irrevocable trust, the healthcare directives, the will revisions. I signed where needed, initialed where asked. After about an hour, she leaned back, satisfied. It's all in motion, she said. Once Leo comes in to sign his part, we'll finalize the filing. If anything happens to you, your assets are protected. Marcus has no legal claim, not unless you change your mind. I won't, I said, my voice firm. You always were the sharpest woman in this town, Ilara. She smiled. You just spent too many years pretending not to be. On my way out, I passed the secretary's desk. A vase of fresh hydrangeas sat near the phone. Arthur had loved hydrangeas, said they reminded him of summer clouds. I smiled at the memory. Outside, the October air bit through my coat, but it felt good, bracing, honest. I stood on the sidewalk a minute before getting into my car, letting the cold remind me that I was still here, still standing. Marcus thought he'd buried me in paperwork, tucked me away in an apartment I hadn't chosen, paid for my groceries with money I once earned myself, and called it generosity. But I wasn't buried, not yet. I was still the woman who ran a successful architectural firm, who nursed her husband through 2 rounds of cancer treatment, who saved every receipt, read every contract, paid every bill on time, even when it meant going without. I was still her, and she had finally had enough. There's a folder in the back of my filing cabinet I hadn't touched in years. A thick manila folder, fraying at the corners, held closed with a stretched rubber band. Not private, just full. I took it out that evening after seeing Evelyn, set it down on the kitchen table, and sat with it the way people sit with old letters from a forgotten war. Not fondly, just quietly. The label read, Marcus, Assistance and Property Management. Inside were receipts, statements, printouts, copies of transfers, notes in my own precise handwriting, each a reason I'd said yes. $28,200 loan for emergency roof repair on his first rental property. $5,000 bridge money for Chloe's boutique, which she sold 6 months later at a loss. $7,400 for the twins' summer STEM camp. $16,000 partial tuition when they missed a scholarship deadline due to Marcus's oversight. $8,500 legal retainer when his business partner sued him. $3,100 credit card payoff. Just this once, mother. I could go on. He used to say, I just need a little help to get over this hump. But somehow Marcus's life was one long, unending incline, and I was the constant wind at his back. I read each line slowly, not because I couldn't read fast, but because each number came with its own memory, his voice, his earnest face, the way he'd act, surprised that I needed time to think, the way he'd get quiet, then disappointed, then cold. Don't worry about it. Forget I asked. So I'd cave every time because I couldn't stand that coldness, because I wanted to stay useful, because I wanted him to love me, or at least remember that I was a person. And what did I get? Last Christmas, he brought a gift in a designer bag, a small, artisanal candle. I opened it later that night and saw the price tag still on the bottom, marked down from $25 to $15. A candle that smelled like disappointment. A note that read, "Thanks for everything. Everything." I flipped through the folder and reached the final pages. Statements from the joint property management account we'd opened when Arthur passed. The one Marcus was supposed to help me manage. Last year's balance, $200,000. This year, $187,000. I stared at the numbers. I remembered asking Marcus if we were on track. He'd smiled, patted my hand, and said, "You've got nothing to worry about, Mother. I've been reinvesting, optimizing the portfolio. It's all working for you." I hadn't asked for proof, hadn't demanded passwords. I didn't want to seem suspicious. But now I understood. He wasn't helping me manage my money. He was helping himself to it. And then came today, the final insult, $20,000 in an envelope, like he was closing a tab. That envelope was still on the counter. I hadn't even opened it. Maybe I never would. Maybe I'd frame it. A tiny, square symbol for a lifetime of blind, unrequited devotion. I put everything back in the folder, removed the rubber band, and took out a pen. I added a note to the final page in red ink. Total given, $1,124,000. Total returned, $0. Total respect shown, variable, usually unavailable. I replaced the folder in the drawer, closed it, and stood in the kitchen with my palms flat on the cool granite countertop. The house was quiet, except for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I thought of Arthur. I thought of how he used to mutter when Marcus asked for too much. "We're not raising a boy, Alara. We're training a tax deduction." He always meant it as a joke. I wonder what he'd say now. Then I thought of Leo, sweet, earnest Leo, with his thoughtful questions. He still called to ask how my research on local historical architecture was going. He still asked if I needed the gutters cleaned. He brought me books he thought I'd like, and then actually asked me what I thought of them, and he never once asked for a cent. I walked to the living room where the evening sun was spilling in, warm and amber, over the antique couch cushions. I sat down slowly, my knees giving that familiar dull protest. I reached for the notepad I kept by the phone and wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. Tomorrow, I begin again. I didn't sleep that night, not from worry, not anymore, but from a strange kind of clarity. It was as if my mind had swept the floor clean after decades of accumulated clutter. Everything I had let slide, excused, overlooked, now lay in bright, unforgiving light, and I wasn't turning away. At 7:15 the next morning, I brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea and set the small kitchen table for two. 2 antique porcelain cups, 2 plates. I even took out the special lemon curd I usually save for Sundays. Leo was coming by. He always came on Saturdays, like clockwork. Only now I had something to give him that no one had ever truly given me. Not money, not advice, but trust. He arrived at 8:05, 5 minutes late by his own meticulous standards. I saw his old hatchback pull up from the front window, the way I used to watch Marcus's sleek sedan when he still visited unannounced. He knocked once, then let himself in. "Morning, Grandma," he said, setting his worn canvas bag by the door. "You're late," I teased, already pouring tea. "Don't fire me yet. I've got a pie to make up for it." He placed the box on the table. From the Gilded Spoon Bakery, not the cheap supermarket, lemon meringue. "You trying to make me cry first thing in the morning?" I asked, and he laughed. That deep, warm laugh that always made him seem older than his 26 years. We sat, we ate, we talked about nothing important, how the neighbor's ancient oak was finally turning russet, how the winter heating bill was going to be brutal this year, how my porch swing was still holding on despite one chain looking suspicious. And then I said it, quietly, clearly. "I want to change my will." He stopped mid-bite, his fork hovering. "Okay," he said carefully, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "You sure?" "I'm sure of a lot of things now," I replied. "I'm sure I spent too long pretending I wasn't disappointed. I'm sure your father sees me as a line item. I'm sure I've confused being needed with being loved. But most of all, I'm sure that you've earned what he never bothered to ask for, my trust." Leo sat very still. His face didn't light up. It didn't fall. He just listened. "I'm not leaving you money so you can owe me," I continued. "I'm doing it so you can be free. So you never have to become someone like your father, a man who calls helping people a burden, who thinks dignity is something he gets to distribute like an allowance." Leo was quiet for a long time. "I don't want your money, Grandma," he said finally, his voice soft. "I know," I smiled. "That's why you deserve it." We talked through the details. I explained what Evelyn and I had already prepared, the trust, the inheritance protections, the clause about charitable donations if he ever changed his mind. He listened with the kind of patience Marcus never had, as if what I said might matter more than what he wanted to say next. When we finished, I walked over to the drawer and pulled out the folder marked Marcus, Assistance and Property Management. "I want you to read this someday," I say so. "I know then, I know gan and sound." And tear it to him. "Not now, not while it's still fresh, but I want you to understand how people let themselves become invisible, one favor at a time." He took it, didn't open it, just placed it gently back on the table. Then he looked at me in that way only Leo ever had. Not like a man looking at an old woman, but like a boy trying to understand how someone he loved could have been overlooked for so long. "I'll sign whatever you need me to," he said. "But just so you know, I'd still come every Saturday, even if all you left me was the lemon curd." That was the moment. That was the moment I knew I was doing the right thing. Monday morning, I dressed with more care than usual. A dark emerald green silk blouse, tailored wool slacks that didn't pinch at the waist, the antique cameo brooch Arthur gave me the year Marcus was born. Not because I expected applause, but because sometimes dignity starts with buttons done properly and shoes that shine, even if no one's looking. At 9:45, I parked at Sterling Trust Bank. My sensible sedan hummed as I turned the key off, loyal, a little loud, but never let me down. Unlike some people. Inside, I was met with the usual corporate brightness, piped-in classical music, fresh coffee scent, plastic plants, too symmetrical to be real. But I wasn't here for aesthetics. Mr. Henderson, my account manager, stood to greet me. Polite as always. In that way, men are when they're used to assuming older women just want help finding their PIN numbers. Mrs. Vance, good morning. Everything all right with your accounts? I have a few questions, Richard, I said as we walked toward his office. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I took it without small talk. He looked a little nervous, maybe because the last time I was in, I'd revoked Marcus's financial authorizations without warning. I want to confirm some recent activity, I said, pulling a folded sheet from my purse. Specifically, any transactions linked to the joint property management account. He typed quickly, eyes flicking across the screen. Yes, I see it here. Quite a bit of movement earlier this year. Several disbursements and fund reallocations, all within authorized access at the time. But that access was removed 4 weeks ago, I finished for him. He nodded. Correct. Since then, only you have access. Would you like a full breakdown? Print it, I instructed. He complied as the printer hummed. I leaned back and watched him. Young man, nice enough. But he looked at me with the distance reserved for faded portraits. He handed me the sheets. Total withdrawn by Marcus in the last 18 months, $912,000. I didn't flinch. I already knew. Can you flag this account? I asked. Any attempts to access or modify, I want to call. Of course. And the retirement savings, I continued. Have any automatic withdrawals been scheduled? Let me check. His eyes scanned again. There was an authorization request submitted online last week. It was flagged. Didn't match your current access settings. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He's still trying. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Would you like to set a secondary alert? Maybe notify your legal team as well? I already did. My lawyer has copies of everything. We finalized a few other updates, removed old contact numbers, added a backup security word. I chose hydrangeas, because why not? I thanked him, stood, and shook his hand. As I turned to leave, he hesitated. Mrs. Vance? Yes? I just want to say a lot of people come in here confused, overwhelmed. You're not like that. You seem sure. I paused. That's because I've spent a long time being unsure. It's a kind of sickness, you know. Doubt. It creeps into your bones if you let it. But I'm older now. I've learned who to believe. He nodded slowly, like he understood, even if he didn't quite. Outside, the sky had turned pale with the promise of rain. I stood on the sidewalk a moment, breathing it in. Some people think justice is loud. I don't. Sometimes it's a piece of paper. Sometimes it's a no, said quietly. Sometimes it's a line on a screen that says unauthorized access denied. He rang the doorbell twice, then knocked, his old rhythm from childhood, the one he used when he forgot his keys after school and wanted me to open quickly. I stood in the hallway, not rushing, just watching the door like it might open by itself and spare us both what was coming. Another knock, then his voice, slightly muffled. Mother, I know you're home. I opened the door. Marcus stood there in a tailored jacket, expensive shoes, and that forced smile he'd perfected over the years. He held a paper bag in one hand. Wine, probably. Hi, Mother, he said brightly, stepping forward. Can I come in? That depends, I said, my voice calm even. Are you here to visit or to explain? His smile twitched, faltered. Can we talk? I stepped aside without a word. He walked in like he owned the place, just like always. In the living room, he looked around as if something had changed since his last visit 6 months ago. It hadn't. Still the same faded velvet couch, still the same worn Persian rug. The only thing different was me. "I brought some things," he said, lifting the bag. "Coffee from that little place you like, and, some shortbread. Leave it in the kitchen." He placed the bag on the counter, then stood awkwardly by the dining table, clearly expecting an invitation to sit. I didn't give one. He sat anyway. "I was surprised to hear you change the estate documents," he said, as if we were discussing a change in gardening services. "I figured you would be," I replied, my gaze steady. He tried to smile again, but it came out crooked. "Look, Mother, I think we've had a misunderstanding. I only set things up at the bank to help. I wanted to take some of the pressure off you." "Is that what you told yourself?" I asked. He leaned forward, hands clasped, trying to seem humble. It didn't suit him. "I know I haven't always said thank you, but I've handled a lot too, you know. You haven't made things easy." "How so?" He blinked, surprised at being challenged so directly. "Well, you hold on to things. You don't trust anyone. You've always kept your finances a mystery." "Because I had to," I cut in. "Because every time I told you how much I had, it somehow turned into a list of things you needed." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You're mad about the property document," he said finally. "It wasn't meant to be offensive. I just wanted you to feel secure. You always said you hated uncertainty. And you thought 20,000 would buy my silence, my surrender." "That's not what I held up a hand, not to silence him, but to save him from further digging. "Marcus, I raised you. I know what you look like when you lie. You think because I've gotten quiet over the years that I've gotten weak, but you're wrong. I've gotten tired." "There's a difference." He slumped slightly in the chair. "Why now?" he asked, his voice softer, almost a plea. "Why cut me out completely?" I studied him for a long moment. 48 years old, a grown man, a father, and yet here he sat like a boy, being told no for the first time. "Because you stopped seeing me," I said. "You saw my money, my usefulness, my ability to fix, but not me. Not the woman who gave up her architectural career so you could go to private school. Not the one who pulled 2 shifts at a drafting firm to pay for your university visits. Not the one who sat up nights calculating how to afford everything you promised you'd repay and never did." He looked down at his polished shoes. "People show you who they are when they think you'll always say yes. I just finally said no." Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. The grandfather clock ticked steadily behind him. "So, that's it?" he asked, not quite hiding the bitterness in his voice. "You're cutting me off?" "No, Marcus, I'm letting you go." He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back too hard against the rug. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "After everything I've done." "Exactly," I said, standing, too. "After everything you've done." He stared at me, jaw clenched, but found no words. He just picked up his coat, turned toward the door, and walked out without another sound. I waited until I heard the car drive off, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Then I sat down and poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot he brought. It was still warm, strong, bitter, exactly how I liked it. I didn't cry after he left. I'd brace for it, but it never came. Just a steady, quiet emptiness, only space, and in that space I could breathe. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. I walked through the house, seeing it again as mine. The soft Persian rug Marcus once called outdated. The bookshelf he'd once suggested I clear out for when you downsize. Every corner still bore my touch, not his. Arthur's favorite armchair was still near the bay window. The hand-stitched quilt his mother made still folded over the armrest. I sat there now and let the late afternoon light fall across my hands that had once washed his tiny feet in the sink, stitched his torn jeans, wrote every birthday card, even the years he forgot mine. Letting go wasn't a bang. It was his quiet, still certainty. That afternoon, I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were things I hadn't touched in decades. Arthur's letters from his time abroad. My wedding veil, yellowed now. A small box of Leo's childhood drawings tied with string. And beneath it all, a red leather-bound journal I hadn't seen since the year Arthur died. I'd forgotten I kept it. Started it the day after the funeral. I flipped it open. April 13th. Woke up today, and the house didn't feel like home. Marcus cried at the service yesterday, but I think he was scared more than sad. I don't know how I'm going to do this alone, but I will. The entries were short. Some were barely a paragraph, but they painted a picture even I had stopped looking at. May 7th. Marcus wants to quit his job and start a property management company. Asked for $25,000 to cover his end. I said yes. I wish I'd said, give me a plan first. July 29th. Marcus didn't come for Arthur's birthday. Said he forgot. I didn't cry. Just made Arthur's favorite apple tart anyway and sat on the porch alone. And so it went. Over the years, the tone changed, not into bitterness, but into something colder, a quiet resignation, as if I was merely recording the weather. Sunny, rainy, neglected. I turned to the last entry, dated 6 years ago, November 2nd. He asked again, said it was the last time. It never is. I don't know what hurts more, that he asks or that I keep saying yes. I closed the journal. That was the woman I had been. Loyal, generous, convinced love was sacrifice. Not anymore. I carried the journal to the fireplace, opened the ornate grate, stood for a long time with the pages in my hands. I thought I would burn it, a ritual of sorts, but instead I turned and placed it gently on the shelf beside Arthur's old pipe and a photograph of us taken in 1978, sunburned and laughing on a dock. Some things didn't need to burn. They just needed to be seen. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to Marcus, not to anyone who owed me anything, but to myself. To Alara, you are not a mistake, not a backup, not a burden. You are not too much or not enough. You are not your sacrifices. You are not the quiet place people come to rest and forget to thank. You are a woman who survived loss, gave more than was asked, and still found the strength to say enough. Some people will never see you, but you see you now, and that is enough. Love me. I folded the letter and placed it in the nightstand drawer. Tomorrow, I would call Evelyn. We would begin transferring the estate formally, not just the money, the house, the stocks, the little things that people don't notice until they're told they can't have them. Tomorrow, I would do what Marcus never expected. Live like I belonged to myself. It had rained in the night, not a storm, just a soft, persistent drizzle that left the cobbled streets washed and the air smelling like damp earth and wet bark. I stood by the bay window in Arthur's old flannel robe, nursing a second cup of Earl Grey, watching the drops glides slowly down the glass. I had a phone appointment with Evelyn at 10. But before that, I needed to do something I've been putting off for years. I pulled down the ornate metal box from the hallway shelf, the one with our marriage papers, old insurance forms, deeds to our properties. Beneath the folders was a smaller, unmarked envelope I hadn't opened since Arthur's funeral. It was labeled in his distinctive, elegant handwriting, for when things get difficult. I didn't cry opening it. I didn't even blink. I just slipped the letter out and unfolded the yellowing page. My Alara, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. You're probably in your robe, drinking something hot, pretending you're not overwhelmed. I know you, love. I don't know what's coming next for you, but I know this. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You always were. When the architectural firm faced that brutal recession, you found new clients, worked late, and never complained. When Marcus broke his arm in 3rd grade, you didn't panic. You just carried him through the ER doors like a soldier. But the thing about strength is, people see it and think they get to lean on it forever. They forget it costs you something. I'm asking you now, don't let anyone drain the rest of you, not even our son, especially not him. Give when it feels right, not when it's expected. Say yes only if you mean it. And when the day comes, and it will, when you finally have to choose between being nice and being free, Alara, I hope you choose you. You've earned it. Love, always, Arthur. I folded the letter and sat with it in my lap. Outside, a single crimson leaf floated down from the big maple tree and stuck to the window for a moment before slipping away, like everything, eventually. At 9:55, I went to my drafting table and dialed Evelyn's number. Morning, Mrs. Vance, she answered promptly, like always. I've got all the documents ready. We can sign remotely or in person, whichever you prefer. In person, I said, and I want to add something, not to the trust, to the will. Of course. I want a letter included, a personal one, sealed to be given only to Leo when the time comes. I'll have it notarized and attached. And another thing, I took a breath. I'd like to write a clause for charitable giving. I visited the Hearthstone residence a few years ago. It's falling apart. If I go before I've had the chance, I want a significant portion of my estate to go there, under Arthur's name. Evelyn paused, then with a rare softness in her voice, said, That's beautiful, Alara. We'll make it happen. Thank you. After the call, I pulled a blank page from the drawer and began writing the letter to Leo. No legal terms, no instructions, just words from me, the woman who'd loved quietly and finally learned to speak with clarity. Leo, when you read this, I'll be gone. But don't let that bring you sorrow. You gave me more peace in my last years than I ever knew in my prime. You reminded me that kindness can exist without condition, that respect isn't a transaction, that a heart doesn't have to be pried open to be offered. I hope you live your life full of your own decisions, not weighed down by someone else's guilt. I hope you say no when you need to, and yes, when it's yours to give freely. You were the only one who truly saw me. That mattered more than anything. Love, Grandma. I signed it, sealed it, and placed it next to Arthur's letter. 2 quiet truths to be opened when they were needed, not before. The lawyer's office was quiet when I arrived. Not empty, just the quiet of thick carpet, old wood, and low, decisive tones. Evelyn's assistant greeted me with a warm smile, offered herbal tea, and led me to the same room we'd sat in 2 weeks prior. Evelyn was already there, papers neatly stacked, a fine pen beside them. No small talk this time. She knew I wasn't here to chat. "The documents are ready," she said. "The trust, the revised will, and the charitable clause, all filed and backed up. Once you sign today, it's legally binding." "Good," I said, taking my seat. "Let's do it." She passed me each sheet with steady hands. I read every word, not because I doubted her, but because it mattered that I owned every line. The trust was in Leo's name, not to be touched until he turned 30, except for emergency use with documented approval. Sensible, protected, fair. The will named no primary family beneficiaries, not Marcus, not his wife Chloe, not the twins who hadn't spoken to me. Since the Christmas, I didn't buy them the gaming console they wanted, just Leo and the Hearthstone residents. I included a clause, Evelyn said, tapping one of the pages, that if Leo declines or becomes ineligible, the estate goes into a scholarship fund in your name for architectural students. I nodded. It felt right. No one would ever again say my name and think of it as a checkbook. If they spoke of me, they'd speak of something planted, not handed out. When it came time to sign, I took the pen carefully. My hands were steadier than I expected. Each stroke of the pen felt like a door closing, not with anger, but with finality. Evelyn notarized the signature. "It's done," she said. "Unless you change your mind, this is now the legal structure of your estate." "I won't change my mind." She studied me for a moment. "You know," she said, almost shyly, "I see a lot of women come in here late in life. Some are still waiting for permission. You're not." I looked at her and smiled. I stopped waiting, that's all. You'd be amazed how clear things become when you realize no one's coming to save you, and you don't need them to. We shook hands. As I was gathering my purse, she reached into a drawer and handed me a small envelope. "I took the liberty of printing your letter to Leo on cotton paper. It'll keep longer. This copy is sealed and filed with the estate. But this," she tapped the envelope in my hand, "this one's yours to give now or keep." I thanked her, took the envelope, and left. Outside, the sky had cleared. The wind had lost its chill. I stood on the curb for a while, feeling the weight of nothing. No guilt, no fear, no should-haves buzzing in my ears, just a quiet knowing. I drove home with the window cracked, letting in the scent of dry leaves. I passed the gas station, where Marcus once insisted I let him pay, and then used my credit card anyway. I passed the cafe, where I used to meet other widows for coffee, where we'd all pretend our children called more than they did. At home, I placed the envelope on the nightstand beside Arthur's letter. Later that day, I called the Hearthstone residence, asked for the director. "Yes, hello," I said when she picked up. "My name is Alara Vance. I'd like to speak to someone about making a private donation." The director paused, probably expecting something modest. "Would you be open," I continued, "to a partnership that would fund an entire renovation wing? I'd like it to bear my husband's name." There was a silence, then a flurry of gratitude and flustered professionalism. "No publicity," I added. "I'm not doing this for a plaque. Just do good with it." After the call, I sat back in Arthur's armchair and looked around my living room. So many years spent wondering if I was making the right choices for other people. Now, finally, I was making them for me. It surprised me how much was still left after all the withdrawals, the favors, the quiet disappearances of large sums masked as temporary help. I'd assumed what remained of my estate would be a shadow of what it once was. But when I sat down with the financial auditor Evelyn recommended, a soft-spoken woman named Clarissa with a tidy mind, I learned the truth. You're not broke, Mrs. Vance, she said, flipping to the final page of her folder. You're far from it. She'd gone over every account, every stock, every bond, cross-referenced them with 10 years of tax filings and all the disbursements made under Marcus's previous access. You lost nearly $1.5 million, she said gently, but you still have just over $6 million remaining, including the house and its equity. I blinked. I don't know why I was surprised. Maybe because so many years of depletion had made me forget I'd once been a woman who saved, who invested, who refused to buy what she couldn't pay off by the end of the month. $6 million. After all that. Clarissa passed the summary sheet across the desk. You've weathered worse storms than you realize. I looked at the total, then at her. No, I said. I just stopped pretending the leak wasn't there. She smiled, not quite getting it, but polite enough to let the comment pass. We talked for another 20 minutes about how to manage the funds moving forward, the trust structures, the charitable commitments, the safe growth options. It was the kind of conversation I used to imagine Arthur and I would have in retirement sipping tea, dreaming of little luxuries. Only now it was just me. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a deficit. It felt like ownership. I have one more question, I said as I stood to leave. How quickly could someone drain these accounts if they had access? Clarissa didn't miss a beat. Quickly. One wire transfer, the right passwords, and it could all be gone in hours. And if they didn't know I'd locked them out, they'd likely find out when the transfer failed. Good, I said, and shook her hand. Back home, I stood in my kitchen and looked at the same white enamel stove I'd had for 30 years. I had enough money to replace every appliance, knock out a wall, redo the floors, but I didn't want to. I'd rather spend it on someone else's better future than on marble countertops. I picked up the phone and called Leo. Hey, Grandma. He answered on the second ring. His voice was like balm on a sunburn. You busy tomorrow? Not if you need me. I want to show you something, I said. Bring a notebook. He hesitated. Are we doing estate stuff? Yes, I said, but not the kind you think. The next day, he arrived in jeans and a sweatshirt, looking like the boy I used to pick up from soccer practice. We sat in the dining room, me with my old tin box of savings ledgers, and him with a new leather-bound notebook already filled with tabs and notes. I showed him how I'd done it, the way Arthur and I had saved our first $10,000 by putting $50 a week into a plain blue envelope taped to the back of the pantry shelf. How we never touched that envelope, not even when the roof leaked. He listened, nodded, asked questions. Why are you showing me all this? He asked at one point, confused. You've already given me the trust. I looked at him hard and smiled. Because money without memory makes fools. I'm not giving you wealth, Leo. I'm giving you a foundation. But if you don't know where it came from, what it cost, you'll spend it like Marcus did. He swallowed. I won't. I know, I said. That's why you're the one sitting at this table. We sat until the sun went down. I made sandwiches. He offered to do the dishes. I let him. In the quiet afterward, I opened the drawer and took out the envelope Evelyn had given me, his letter. I want you to read this after I'm gone, I said, pressing it into his hand. Not before. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, just nodded and slid it carefully into his notebook. That night, after he left, I poured myself a glass of wine, the cheap kind, but it tasted good enough. I sat in Arthur's armchair and looked around. No fancy renovations, no legacy carved in marble, just this house, this quiet, and the certainty that the rest of what I had would not be wasted. I hadn't set foot in the Hearthstone residence in nearly 2 years. The last time I was there, it was for my friend Helen. Her daughter had temporarily moved her in after a fall and then never took her back home. Helen tried to smile when I visited, but her hands fidgeted the whole time, not with nerves, but with the knowledge that she'd been quietly put away like a winter coat no one planned to wear again. Now I was back, walking through its double doors, not as a guest, not as a resident, but as a woman with a plan. The receptionist stood as I entered. "Can I help you?" "I have an appointment with Director Davies," I said. 10 minutes later, I was seated across from a neatly dressed man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a desk too cluttered for a man trying to look in control. I liked him instantly. "I appreciate you coming in, Mrs. Vance," he said. "When your lawyer contacted us, I admit I was surprised. I imagine you were. People don't usually donate large sums without strings. And you're donating anonymously?" "Not exactly anonymously," I said. "The new wing will be in my husband's name, Arthur Vance. No press, no photo ops, just a simple plaque and real improvements." He leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of improvements do you have in mind?" "I want the West Wing rebuilt," I said. "It leaks, smells of mildew. Bathrooms are narrow, handrails loose. You know that already, but you've been waiting on county funds that'll never come." He nodded slowly. There was no need to pretend. "I toured it with Helen," I added. "She died in that hallway after her call button failed." His face fell. "I remember. It was a hard week." "It was a cruel week," I corrected. "And I promised myself I'd never end up in a place like this. Not because it was evil, but because it had been abandoned by people who should have cared." He rubbed his hands together, then looked at me more directly. "I want to fix it too, Mrs. Vance. I've just never had the funding." "Well," I said, setting a sealed envelope on the desk, "you do now." He didn't open it immediately, just stared. "Can I ask why you're doing this?" "Really?" I thought for a moment. "Because I was almost sent here," I said. "Marcus had plans, quiet ones, papers already drafted. He thought if he framed it as concern, I'd go willingly. But he didn't understand that being old doesn't mean being unaware." He was quiet. "I'm doing this," I continued, "because some of us don't have sons who check on us. Some of us sit in that West Wing with no visitors and a cracked cup of cold tea, and they still try to hold on to their dignity. I can't fix all of it, but I can fix this." He opened the envelope. When he saw the figure, his mouth parted slightly. "This will cover the entire rebuild," he whispered. "I know," I said, "with enough left for staffing upgrades too. I did the math." He stood, reached out to shake my hand, then paused. "I wish more people were like you." No, I replied. You should wish more people saw people like me before it's too late. On the way out, I passed the recreation room. Bingo was underway. One woman sat alone in the corner, watching the others, her hands folded neatly on her lap. I caught her eye. She smiled, polite, as if not to take up too much space. I smiled back, just as polite, but with a little more weight behind it, because I was coming back, not as a patient, but as a woman, with a checkbook, a vision, and a name that meant something. Now it was Leo who told me. He showed up at the door on a Thursday, earlier than usual, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a folded envelope in the other. I could tell by his face it wasn't a regular visit. He set the bag on the counter without a word and followed me into the living room. He knows, he said. I didn't ask who. I saw him, Leo continued, sitting across from me. Dad, I was meeting a friend for coffee, and he was there talking to some guy about legal options. He didn't see me. I waited. He was trying to find out if the trust could be challenged. He said if he could claim you were coerced or mentally unfit. I didn't sigh. I didn't flinch. I just nodded once, like a woman who already expected the storm and had braced the windows days ago. And? I asked. Leo opened the envelope, a printout of an email chain from Marcus to a local attorney, followed by a firm response. They told him no. The documents are ironclad, witnessed, notarized. The trust is irrevocable. The estate is no longer under his reach. He can't touch a thing. He passed the pages to me, but I didn't need to read them. I just held them like a certificate of release. He's angry, Leo added. I know. He said I was being manipulated, that I'm young, that I don't understand how this makes him look. I looked at my grandson, a boy with his father's jawline, but not his posture. He didn't shrink. He didn't beg. He didn't look away. I told him, Leo said, that you were the first person who ever believed in me without expecting anything back, that this wasn't about money, it was about dignity. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. That part of me had already run dry. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. He wrote this, asked me to give it to you. I didn't take it, not yet. Did you read it? Leo hesitated. No, I figured if you wanted to, you would. I nodded and finally reached for it. It was a single sheet, Marcus's handwriting, neat, practiced, like everything he'd ever done. I unfolded it and read it silently. Mother, I don't know what you think I've done, or maybe I do, and I just never expected you to actually push back. I was trying to take care of things. I've always been the one to handle the mess, haven't I? You let me for years, and now suddenly I'm the villain. I don't understand how you could do this. Cut me out completely. Reward Leo like he's some saint just because he visits on Saturdays. That's not loyalty, Mother. That's weakness. But fine. If this is what you've decided, then I'll respect it. Just know you've changed the way I see you. Sorry, Christ. I say arrogant I see. I cry seeing shower. I retire for crying. Broty. Ain't Tracy. Corey droided it once, then again, and then placed it under the coffee mug on the table. Do you want me to take it back? Leo asked quietly. No, I said. Let it sit here. It belongs right where he left me, under something heavier. He just nodded. Later that evening, we sat in the kitchen while the kettle boiled. I watched Leo from across the table. He looked tired. Not the kind that comes from work, but from watching someone you love unravel in slow motion. He doesn't hate you, Leo said finally. He just doesn't know how to see you. I reached for his hand across the table. I'm not doing this so he'll hate me, I said. I'm doing this so he'll finally stop mistaking my silence for agreement. Leo squeezed my fingers gently. You think he'll ever understand? No, I said, but that's not my job anymore. I drove out to the Hearthstone residence alone. Not because Leo wasn't willing, he offered twice, but because some things you have to do with your own two hands. I didn't tell him what for. I didn't tell anyone. The new West Wing wasn't finished yet, but you could see its bones, fresh beams, bright insulation, wide door frames, new tiles stacked neatly beside buckets of grout. I walked the length of it slowly, nodding to the construction workers who barely looked up. Just another old woman passing through. There was a temporary plaque nailed to a plywood wall near the entrance. Future home of the Arthur Vance residential wing. Built with care, built with love, built with dignity. I stood and stared at it until the air chilled my neck and the wind made my knees ache. But I didn't move, because for the first time in my life, something bore our name without shame or debt attached to it. Not a bill, not an IOU, not a favor to be returned. Just a gesture that meant we were here and we mattered. When I got home, there was a message on my machine. Mother, it's me, Marcus. I just wanted to say I've been thinking. Maybe we could talk. Maybe I didn't handle things right. Just call me back if you want. No apology, just suggestion, just noise. I didn't call back. Instead, I sat with a pen and a notepad and made one final list. Not of what I owed or what I'd given. That ledger was closed. No, this one was different. What I keep, my name untouched, my home warm and quiet, my grandson kind and steady, my memories intact, my letter from Arthur, my strength reclaimed, my silence finally earned. Later, I took down the dusty box from the hallway closet. Inside were old photo albums, Christmas cards, a broken ceramic angel from the first nativity set Arthur bought me. At the bottom, beneath yellowed wrapping paper and bent recipe cards, was a stack of Marcus's childhood drawings. Stick figures with enormous heads, crayon houses, a mother with spaghetti hair, and stars for eyes. I almost tossed them, almost, but something in me stopped. I placed them back gently, not out of sentiment, not out of softness, but because even if he no longer saw me, I remembered the boy who once did. That was enough. That night, I made myself a proper dinner. Roasted vegetables, artisan bread, a glass of red wine. No frozen tray, no crumbs over the sink. I sat at the table, used a linen napkin, played Ella Fitzgerald on the old record player, and I didn't feel alone. I felt full. It rained on the day the renovations were completed. Not a heavy rain, just a soft, steady mist that clung to everything and made the new concrete path outside the Arthur Vance wing shine like glass. I stood beneath the overhang, hands folded, watching as the workers loaded up the last of their equipment, one by one. The director offered a ceremony, a photo, a speech. I declined them all. I didn't need applause. I needed to know I had done what was right, not for my legacy, but for my peace. Inside, the walls were freshly painted, pale sage green, wide windows, new handrails, warm to the touch, not the cold steel that bruises old skin. I walked the corridor slowly. It smelled like lemon and clean linen, not disinfectant, not death. It smelled like someone had planned for life to happen here. As I passed the first room, I saw her, the woman from weeks before, the one who'd sat alone during bingo. She was in a new chair now, feet up, a knitted blanket on her lap. She looked at me, eyes clear. "You were here before," she said. I was. "Did you make all this happen?" I smiled softly. "Just a little part." "Well," she said, nodding toward the wall, "it feels like someone finally remembered we're still here." That stayed with me. Back home, I changed into my robe, poured the last of the wine, and sat with Arthur's letter one more time. I read it out loud this time, like a prayer, like a vow. Then I reached for the final envelope, the one I hadn't sealed yet, the one for Leo. "Leo, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But don't let that darken your heart. You gave me something in these last years that no one else did. Presence, not performance, not pity, just presence. I want you to live without guilt, without fear, without the weight of being someone else's redemption project. You owe nothing. You owe no one. Take the money. Use it wisely. But more than that, take the example. Say yes when it matters. Say no when it saves you. Show up. Stay soft. Let people earn your trust, not assume it. You never had to prove yourself to me. You already were the proof that love, real love, can skip a generation and still find its way home. Live well, sweetheart, and when the time comes, pass it on. Love always, Grandma. I sealed it, set it beside his name in the trust folder. Then I turned out the light and let the quiet hold me. I wasn't leaving with bitterness. I wasn't fading with regret. I was ending my story on my terms, with clarity, with strength, with love, and without apology. Because I was never just someone's mother or wife or bank account. I was someone who saw everything, remembered everything, and finally chose myself. If this story found you at the right time, share it. Tell someone who needs to remember their worth, because it's never too late to reclaim your voice. Not ever.